was always a scaredy kind of child. My mind was very imaginative and it could make monsters out of anything. You know, when we were driving in the car at dusk, I would look out at the trees, and with my terrible eyesight, the trees would stop being trees and they would start being these six-headed monsters with two necks that connected to all six of them. And then sometimes when it was stormy and the bushes that laid up against the door were scratching on it, in my head they would become these great big bears that were scratching and trying to get at me. But as much as I was a scaredy child, I was an arrogant child, because I knew that anything my mind could create, I could conquer with my own cleverness. So those bears, I would draw pictures of the bushes that were outside the door, and I would pull them out when the bears came out to eat me. And those trees, as the headlights floated over them, I would count the leaves that I could see so that I could tell myself they were trees. And even the things other people told me existed, I could conquer with my mind. You see, if vampires were a growing problem, as Buffy the Vampire Slayer had convinced me that they were, and if vampires can only be invited into a home, they can't just break in, then I could at night pull the blankets up over my neck and declare that my bedding was my home. That way, if my parents were stupid enough to let them into the living room and get themselves eaten, I would still be safe. Now, both this fear and this cleverness, I felt, could be monetized. You see, my family knew how scared I was. They saw me when I had to go outside to the car, when I left the safety of the porch light, just run to get to the car and slam the door shut. They were aware. And they teased me mercilessly. So one night, I bet my grandfather I could sleep outside the entire night. And he said, if you do that, I'll give you $5 for every hour you stay out there. Whoa. And I said, if those are your terms, I accept, and we shook. He did not say where outside I had to sleep. So I slept on the porch under the porch light, because dark monsters can't come to the porch light. And so I stayed up the whole night, and through the glow of that porch light, I read Where the Red Fern Grows. And the next morning, I walked up to the cabin door. I knocked on it. My grandfather, very put out, opened the door and handed me $50. But then he raised the bet. He said, I will give you double if you sleep out in the field overnight. Now that I took as an insult to my cleverness. So 11-year-old me had to say yes. Now, in the field, there was no porch light, because convenient fact, porches are not in the field. But there can be torchlight, flashlights exist, so I smuggled one into my bag. And I packed up everything I needed and I set up the tent. And that night, my grandparents walked me out at dusk and left me to the wild. And when they were far enough away, I clicked on my flashlight and I brought out J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, which, believe it or not, was my homework. At my middle school, for some reason, they decided that honor students had to read the entirety of Lord of the Rings and pass an Elvish exam. Are there any Lord of the Rings fans here in the audience tonight? My Gavan and Melon. So I set up shop and I started reading, and The Hobbit was absolutely enthralling. It was set in this idyllic landscape in a shire with rolling hills. And I was so into it. And Bilbo Baggins, the main character, his house gets invaded by a wizard and some dwarves. And that sounded terrifying because who wants to cook that much? So I kept reading, but my eyes started to flutter a little. I started to get a little tired, and I didn't notice that the glow of the sun was gone. It was no longer coming through the canvas, and now the bounce of the light off the flashlight was coming back to me from the canvas. It was dark outside completely, and then it got to the part where they were fighting the goblins, and they escaped, and they got this new weapon, and it was gorgeous, and they stayed with the elves, and I got more and more tired. And then, chapter 6, out of the frying pan into the fire, all the characters found themselves at the top of a tree, and they were surrounded by vargs, giant wolves, and Gandalf the wizard threw down flaming pine cones, and the wolves themselves caught fire, and the wolves and the goblins ran around the forest until the entire forest caught fire, and I was out. When I woke up, everything was pitch black. I kind of blinked a little, trying to adjust my eyes, but I couldn't see a thing. And that's when I heard the sniffing and a footstep. No, because scary things, those are in your mind. If you want to get rid of them, you use cleverness. So I reached for the flashlight. The flashlight had been on when I fell asleep. It was off now. It had no battery. But light is how you get rid of the dark monsters. But sometimes with monsters, you can get rid of them if you can prove that they're not acting like monsters, because then they're not real monsters. So if you make a noise and they don't make a noise, they're not a monster. So I moved my hand a little, and it growled. And I could hear whatever it was start to circle the tent like it was plotting, like it was planning. And I, for the life of me, could not think of an ounce of cleverness that could get rid of this monster. So I caved, and I reached under my pillow, and I pulled out my brick of a Nokia phone, and I texted my grandparents, help. And at that point, I could feel the tent start to tip, like a nose was pressing into it, and I heard the door of my grandparents' cabin open and shut, and so did whatever was next to my tent. It took off running, not away from the tent, but through it. Massive paws brought the tent down on top of me, and I heard a ripping sound, and then it ran into the forest. Now, by the time my grandparents got to me, it was already gone, and the tent had collapsed on top of me completely. And they laughed, because they figured that the tent had just come down, and I had panicked. And they carried me back home, and they put me in bed, and the next morning, we went out to get that tent. And as we picked it up, we saw 4 large gashes where whatever it was, its claws had torn through. Now I learned a valuable lesson that night. Cleverness might be able to defeat the monsters in your mind, but there are real dangers in the world, and to defeat those, you must ask for help.